Hello, everyone, and welcome back to FutureBuilt. I'm Matt Boney, your host, and I'm here today with Brad Hargreaves, who is the co-founder of Thesis Driven. It's an amazing platform. We use it as Infinite. The company has many amazing insights. They're basically the most cutting edge firm when it comes to insights in real estate, in my opinion. So, Brad, super happy to have you here on the podcast. Excited to dive into some really interesting topics today. And yeah, feel free to introduce yourself. Tell the audience a little bit about Thesis Driven, what you're up to.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the kind words. Thanks so much for having me on today. As you mentioned, run a company called Thesis Driven. We originally started as a newsletter focused on, and still are a newsletter focused on innovation in real estate. So kind of let's look out 12, 24, 36 months, what's coming down the pike, not just in terms of technology. Obviously, we write about technology. That's a piece of it, but we're also talking about shifts in the capital markets, cultural change, how that is influencing what gets built and how people want to live and work. We've also expanded into a number of other products based on the audience we've built. So we have, for instance, a database of real estate operators and one of investors called Capital Stack. So helping real estate developers connect and meet people who are going to be relevant to their business. And we also have a number of classes and workshops. I've been doing this for about 3 years. Prior to that, I ran a multifamily operating platform called Common, focused on innovative typologies like co-living and micro apartments. And before that, I co-founded a technology trade school called General Assembly.
Amazing. So really bringing, I mean, obviously the perspective from today's business, but also I think some really unique perspective from the last two ventures. So let's dive in. Maybe give me like a broad overview of what you think are the most important shifts you're seeing happening today, generally speaking, in real estate. And then let's kind of dive in from there.
Sure. So, we write about kind of a lot of things in terms of the future of real estate. So there's a lot of ways you could slice and dice that. Obviously, you can't have that conversation without talking about AI and the role of AI, not just in operations where it has made real inroads, particularly in multifamily operations, has totally transformed over the past 2 or 3 years. Things like leasing, customer support, maintenance dispatch, et cetera. But is increasingly making inroads in the development and acquisitions side as well, and is starting to change the real estate analyst role as site selection looks very different, underwriting and analysis looks very different. So there are some big transformations happening driven by AI. But we're also looking at what's going on in the capital markets. And one macro trend has been the traditional asset classes of, multifamily office looking a little bit less attractive from a yield and a risk return standpoint. For 10, 15 years, operators could do Sunbelt value add multifamily and, cap rate compression and what was happening with rates would pretty much ensure that even if, things didn't go totally according to plan operationally, they were still going to do all right and the returns would be good. Now we're seeing the reverse side of that, it's just really tough for those deals to pencil. They're not producing the kind of yields that investors want to see given the risk they're taking on. So as investors get hungrier for deals, particularly family office investors, real estate private equity firms, they're looking at the niches. They're looking at, anything that's a little off the beaten path. I mean, obviously industrial, niche industrial particular. So, industrial outdoor storage, various, um, related kind of fields, a lot of the infrastructure stuff, data centers, of course, have gone to the moon, and that's now a very tough category to penetrate. But they're looking at hospitality. I mean, outdoor hospitality concepts in particular have done really well as of late in tapping the capital markets. They're getting a lot of interest given the relatively low kind of entry price and check size versus the yield that many are able to produce. And you even have, truly kind of innovative models, a lot of leisure anchored real estate, surf parks, a lot of institutional interest in surf parks, remarkably, which is I find fascinating. Yeah, so you're seeing, and it's kind of an exciting time to be in real estate right now because you're seeing all this interest in these niches, and part and parcel to that is innovation around how these platforms get funded. So it's not just about, okay, your typical single asset syndicate, then you go out and raise a fund. We're seeing more co-GP investing, we're seeing more platform investing. And I think that's fascinating and wonderful and kind of helps operators get off the ground in ways that 5, 7 years ago, they might have gone out and raised venture dollars, which was a bad fit for a lot of these platforms. We could dive into any of those, but we're seeing a lot of innovation across the board.
It's amazing. Yeah, they're all fascinating to me. I think one thing that's really interesting and stands out is this idea of like the barrier to entry to going into owning physical assets kind of coming down in a way, especially around the outdoor hospitality niche that you mentioned. That's definitely something we're seeing from Infinite side and on Future Build is a lot of these modular companies kind of getting into the space. The cost of these units in the low hundreds of thousands. So deployment is a lot cheaper than building something multi-story from the ground up. What are the trends you're seeing around raising capital for some of these, let's call it niche or off the beaten path segments?
So the good and the bad news is that the VCs have left the building. There is no more venture capital available for real estate operating concepts, which is frankly how many of these concepts got backed, got funded, um, 5 or 7 years ago. Certainly 10 years ago, many of them were getting backed by venture dollars. And, even I would say more kind of asset manager businesses that don't have an operational component, but are simply, purchasing real estate assets. I mean, that was a very hot venture category for a while. I mean, the wind has really gone out of those sails. So what we're seeing in place of that is, one, a lot more. I mentioned co-GP and platform investing, funds getting creative, creating little pools of capital to do innovative deals that don't look like your typical LP investment into a syndicate or, um, you know, backing a fund. You're also seeing models like Reseed. That's what Moses Kagan and Rhett Bennett. They started out on the West Coast, effectively an accelerator program for up and coming real estate operators. Now they're not innovating on asset class; they're innovating on funding type. But
Interesting.
their first cohort was value add multifamily, and I believe their second cohort is industrial. So they're not innovating on the type; they're innovating on the capitalization, which is interesting in its own right. And a lot of the capital is now coming from family offices. I think a lot of institutions are still sitting on the sidelines. They're still saying, "Hey, you know, we still haven't cashed out of the last round of real estate funds we backed in the 2000 to 2022 time horizon. So we're going to sit on our hands for a couple of years until we see those returns and that capital refreshes." So the gulf has really been taken up by, to some extent, real estate private equity has come off the sidelines, but certainly family offices have played a larger and larger role in backing these novel concepts.
Interesting. What are some of the favorite novel concepts that you've seen come through in the last, let's call I don't know, year or two? Something relevant and fresh that's catching your eye.
Well, I mentioned a couple. I mean, the outdoor hospitality concepts I find really interesting, but one that, as a parent of a father of three, that I've really gotten excited about is the idea of a family oriented membership club.
That's awesome.
Met a couple of guys last year who started a company called Roster Family Clubs. They're building their first club in East Dallas called Stone Throw, and they've taken this vacant office building and are turning it into this really extraordinary family oriented club that has pools, kind of constant family oriented activities, food and beverage, basically taking the country club model, but rather than it being anchored around golf and tennis and the things the boomers want to do, it's anchored around the things families want to do. And, mom and dad being able to show up and, you know, go have a nice brunch while the kids go to activities and have a great time with their friends. And, this really sounds extraordinary, and kind of look at it and I'm like, why doesn't this exist? I want this around me. Now it's probably a long time before they're coming to Chelsea, Manhattan, where I live, but maybe I should move to East Dallas. I don't know. I mean, this seems like a pretty incredible thing. Um, so I love those concepts, things that are, not just, purely, okay, we're going to go and acquire a handful of assets, but really innovating on social trends and pushing the ball forward.
Absolutely. And I've been lucky enough to see some of the sort of high level renders of that particular club. And I think it's so interesting that it was basically this, I think it was a 1980s sort of defunct-ish office
Mhm.
space. Is that right? And that's what's been converted into this club concept?
Yeah, I mean, it's your incredibly ugly, defunct, obsolete suburban 3-story squat office building from the 80s. Uh, is everything you imagine it is and worse. I mean, the alternative for this site was probably scrape it and, build low-rise multifamily. But they found incredible use for it, and I'm really excited to see the end product there.
For sure. For sure. Do you see a lot of this sort of repurposing of assets happening, or is it more of kind of just scrape it clean and start fresh?
I mean, it's tough. You have to actually sharpen your pencil and get into the underwriting of it and decide, like, does it make sense to keep this shell or not? And I think if you're doing a member club or something where you have a little more wiggle room with kind of where various things go, it can make a lot of sense. Like, you can, repurpose it in a way where you're keeping the central HVAC, you're keeping the central elevator core. You don't have to move those building systems. If you're converting that to apartments, it's a real problem because suddenly you need HVAC in every unit, so you gotta replace that system. The elevator placement may not work. You probably have a big unlit core that you can't use because every bedroom needs light and air. So you got a lot more problems if you're converting it to apartments, and unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, most people, when they say, "Okay, what should this office building be? What should this site be?" The answer is apartments, and unfortunately, the physical structure that is there today usually doesn't work for apartments.
Super interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating. I love the concept. I think it kind of follows the trend of obviously families finding new ways to stay entertained as well as moving out of the city. I think, being in my early 30s, like meeting a lot of people that are kind of sick of the urban core and wanting to find a fresh place to move to and sort of a new community to become part of. Like this definitely fits within that thesis. And to your point of, maybe I should just move there. Like I think it's true that these places can become destinations where it warrants actually like packing up and moving somewhere new. Um,
Well, just to build on that, I mean, I think there is you're seeing the disagglomeration of, you know, people, human capital in the US today. I mean, New York has a smaller and smaller share of finance jobs. You're seeing a real divergence between, you go back 20 years, you looked at a state's tax rates, and you couldn't tell, is that a red Sunbelt state or a blue coastal state? Like, there was all kind of the same and mixed together. Now there's just a complete divergence between states that are, open to entrepreneurship and creating new things and want new businesses, and states that don't. And I think what that means is obviously is there is a premium on, people who can create cool social destinations for this uh, human capital that's moving to the Sun Belt. And I think that is a weird way of saying that, like, I like what Nick and Dawson are doing at Stone Throw.
no, it's well, I don't know if you know about a daycation that the last company I worked on, but it's kind of that idea of we were selling day passes to hotel
Yeah,
amenities and
absolutely.
this idea of like how can you, especially in the age of AI, which I'm sure we'll get into, like all these sorts of companies are kind of becoming a little bit more obsolete, whether it's SaaS or this or that, because the barrier to entry just comes down. So what are the things you can do to actually build a moat? Maybe it's access to unique data, or in some cases to the vacation or this model's point, like maybe it's the idea of providing a group of people or a community, um, curating that community, and then having people pay for access to it. Like that's still something that I view as defensible in the age of AI for now. And like, I think that's a really cool part about their model. It's like, this could be something that really can stand the test of time, assuming, the experience is great and the members don't churn. Like it's a
100%.
super interesting model. So I love it for that reason. What are you seeing? I guess let's take a turn towards AI for a second. Like, what are the practical like tools or things that you guys are implementing today, or real estate developers are implementing today that are actually making a difference? Um, you know,
Yeah, I mean, so I'd look on the operations side first, particularly in multifamily. And multifamily is, with maybe build to rent and single family rental close behind is really, the vanguard here because they have a lot more interactions happening, that require kind of natural language, leasing interactions, customer service interactions, delinquency and collection interactions, and LLMs are pretty good at handling all of that. So if you are running a Class A office building, you're not going to get enough inbound leasing inquiries. If a huge law firm reaches out and says, "Hey, we want to lease 100,000 square feet." I mean, that's one, that's coming through a tenant rep broker, not over the transom. And two, like you want a human dealing with that, not
yeah, yeah,
not an AI chatbot. But in multifamily, you're running 3 to 5% vacancy. A lot of the people reaching out aren't really serious. It's a high volume of interactions. So using something like Elise AI to manage all of that, frankly, is better results than using humans at this point. And what people have noticed is once you get good at that, there's a bunch of places you can apply it, even places that nobody was really expecting a couple of years ago. So I think if you had gone back 3 years and said, well, pick one thing in multifamily operations where AI is not going to have a role, they probably would have said, delinquency and collections. Like you still need a dude walking around banging on doors asking for money. Well, turns out today, one of the most obvious high ROI applications of artificial intelligence is in delinquency and collections. And the reason is that most collections conversations are not someone's just refusing to pay the rent. You need someone to kind of like, you know, go talk to them.
that's right.
It's, someone had a dispute about their pet fee, like they got a late fee and they want to know why, like their maintenance charges, things like that. And AI is infinitely knowledgeable and patient and has those conversations a lot better than the on-site team does, who often kind of punt those things out and they don't want to have those hard conversations, but AI doesn't care.
Yeah,
So, delinquency and collections, great example. Where you're starting to see it right now have, I would say, more surprising inroads. Um, I would say on the development side, on the land acquisition and analysis side, you get a bunch of, now it's not about looking at whatever you saw on LoopNet and underwriting it. It's about pushing 10,000 off market sites through a filter
hmm,
and seeing what might be interesting and then using, a contact tool to reach out to all of those owners. So
interesting.
it's totally changed the site acquisition and sourcing process as well. There's a lot of other things I could talk to. It's kind of touching everything in some form or fashion. But those are the two things I'm paying the most attention to.
Super interesting. Are there companies that you recommend folks check out? Like, let's say in particular, for like the land acquisition side? I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of companies who do it. One I'll particularly call out is Pillar. They're a relatively small company doing pretty innovative and I'd say technically complex things on the automated site sourcing side. I also know Dylan Gorin, the founder. He teaches programs for us. on AI. So they know what they're doing over there. But there's a bunch. There's Land ID, Land Portal, Acres is another that's doing very cool things.
Hmm.
So there are cool things happening out there.
Super interesting. And do you feel like with more of these tools becoming available to the mass market, it's giving the power to kind of, let's call it like the solopreneur, or, you know, maybe a GP or somebody, um, to just be able to build this stack internally and kind of go forward as like a one person team? Like how does that look?
Well, I certainly think there's a leveling effect here that like if you are a solopreneur or even just a small operating team, like you can get tremendous leverage by being early to AI. So like I have, you know, on nights and weekends, when I've been able to, get some time away from the kids, spinning up Claude code and building my own stuff.
Yeah.
And, now we have all sorts of dashboards. I've built, full stack tools I've rolled out. I wouldn't suggest everyone like start, vibe coding your full stack, but it is a pretty extraordinary tool. And if you have not played with Claude code, doesn't matter what your role is. I mean, this is transformative stuff. I would strongly recommend you try it out.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been seeing kind of over the shoulder of my fiance who works at a real estate development firm, a lot of the internal roles that were not traditionally touching software development at all. Now they're all vibe coding their own tools. And it's interesting to me because kind of like the YC slogan of talk to your users in code, um, becomes something that a company can actually internalize, because
Mhm.
they are their own users, right? And so
Yeah.
that iteration cycle just becomes infinitely faster and much more customized to the individuals. So I think that's where I see the challenge, at least in software and particularly SaaS, is like, can you build a product better than someone who knows exactly what they want and they can just continuously iterate like 24/7 on it? So that begs a lot of questions in my mind just about like where all of that's going. But
Yeah,
to
I mean, there is a strong argument that like not a great time to be owning stock in a SaaS company or debt in a SaaS company.
yeah,
That those margins, even if they don't disappear, are going to get whittled away because the alternative is a lot cheaper than it once was, which is go build it yourself.
right,
Um, I still think there's some time before, like years before, we're seeing most organizations just go off and do this. I mean, I think your wife's development company is very cool, but like your fiance's, sorry,
hmm,
uh, you know, that's an outlier today.
yeah,
Like
and
the idea that you have a development firm where, your acquisitions team is vibe coding stuff, like that is, you know, top 5 percentile, I would say.
interesting. Okay, that's interesting to know. Yeah, I was kind of wondering where they were on that,
No,
continuum.
that is really cool, and I think it's where things are headed, but is objectively an outlier today.
One. Okay, good to know. But yeah, I think it's just it's really, I mean, it's amazing for people like myself that never learned, to actually code to that level, to be able to whip something up immediately and have a working prototype at minimum is really cool. Um,
It really is. I mean, I think the thing on the usage side to remember is like I forget exactly what Claude Code's user number is, but it's not more than a few million.
yeah, right.
So it's
Yep.
still, I
That's
mean,
a
you
good
have
point.
to remember if you're doing it today, um, you're still like way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're still in that first early adopter segment, probably pretty far to the left of that curve. However, LinkedIn would make you think otherwise, probably with everybody posting about it.
So
Um, but what other things do you see? I mean, one thing that I'm seeing that's really interesting is also like, even with Infinite, what we did originally was like just type into ChatGPT to get some renders. Like, is this change in what's possible with AI allowing more sort of would-be architects to put concepts out there and try to get them funded? Like, what do you think about that side of things?
that's where I'm bringing a little bit more skepticism to the table here.
Okay.
Um, so yes, you can plug something in and it will give you a render. but it's not really there yet. Some of the point solutions, I would say Test Fit, Algoma, are getting pretty good in terms of like ingesting zoning code and outputting what you can do. But there's still like a lot of weirdo overlays, like special districts, like bonuses, state preemptions that just make this so hard, such a challenging problem. And then, okay, like, you have feasibility analysis. Here's what I think I can build. You still need an architect and someone who knows local zoning laws to be like, can I actually build this? It's very easy to get into a lot of trouble there if you're doing anything other than just like,
Putting a con.
having fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously, once you know what you can build, like AI is great at turning that into a beautiful rendering
Yeah.
and being like, okay, I know my massing. Let's like make this beautiful.
Mhm.
AI is very good at that, and create a nice slide you can show to the planning board. But like, um, it is not ready to produce like actual like design development or construction documents. What it can do, and there's a tool called Light Table that does this, another called Trunk Tools that does it. Um, is will take plans that architects have made and check them for errors. So
Mhm.
check them against the zoning code, the building code, check them against other plan documents. So check your HVAC doc against your plumbing doc. You know, are there conflicts there? And avoid change orders down the road. So that is actually an area that I'm more bullish on.
Okay. Yeah. So interesting. Like the inverse, basically taking what's done by humans, uploading it to AI, and having it fact check is at this point a better application than, hey, let's try to take what the AI has done as a render and somehow translate it into real plans.
Correct. It's just there's too much can go wrong there. It is right now too complex and the liability is too great. I mean, if you know, implement some AI chatbot and, maybe you're going to lose some of your leads, maybe worst case it'll be a fair housing violation or something.
Yeah.
Um, if it produces construction documents that don't have the right, structural joins, like your building can fall apart and people die. Like it's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
risk is way higher.
Right. That's interesting. I mean, it's something. It's something that kind of goes back to that like oversight question. Like, how do we kind of track that and make sure that it's not done in any way? I guess you have to have a human filter,
Yeah, I
basically.
mean, the architecture, it's the way architecture works. I mean, architecture it is a guild that is strongly self-regulated, and every plan that is submitted needs a human architect's stamp. And if an architect is going around stamping plans that were generated by AI that they have not fully verified and checked, like they're not going to be an architect for very long. They're going to lose their license.
Yeah.
So it's it does as a guild
Really.
somewhat have those self-regulatory mechanisms built in.
Yeah. Thankfully, we're
Thankfully.
thankful for that. Yeah. No, that's super interesting. I mean, um, what about like using AI for some of the legal implications? Like, I know that's another field that's kind of seeing this just massive shift, but at the same time has like that human element. As it relates to real estate, like, where do you think that is on the evolution of where it could be?
You mean like drafting documents and
Yeah, I guess checking, everything on the legal side for any sort of development. Like, is is it getting closer, some of this technology, to being able to do what a lawyer could do, or not yet?
yeah, so some of it is, some of it isn't. Um, I would say it's much further along than architecture, way further along than architecture.
Interesting.
Ultimately, it benefits from the fact that law is all natural language. Um, you know, there have been some funny cases of like AI hallucinating case law, and that making it into actual briefs and lawyers getting in trouble for that. But I would say the area where it's just like a total no-brainer for multifamily, real estate owner operators to do right now is contract and document abstraction. So what it's very good at is it can take all of your leases, all of your vendor agreements, whatever, like thousands of pages of stuff, and basically turn that into structured data. So when do your contracts expire? What are the early termination provisions? What are the costs? Like all of that. Very, very good at that. You can even do that with a foundational model. Like you don't need a point solution to do that. You can use one if you want, but like you don't need to. Where the point solutions add intelligence is like, okay, a company like Revise has, a ton of market data on, okay, well, what should a pest control contract cost? Like, are these guys taking advantage of you? 'Cause should you run should you bid this out? And if you should bid it out, like when do you need to bid it out to, be able to terminate the contract without penalty? So that kind of vendor management intelligence, like that's really a no-brainer. Um, you know, I don't have a strong view on, you know, using AI as a lawyer in like negotiating documents. Obviously, the more complex and nuanced the document, the less training data AI is going to have for that document, the worse it's going to be. Um, but it is less far afield than architecture.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting to know, and it does make sense why. Um, to shift gears one last time here, it's interesting for me to always hear people's opinion on where modular development is today, whether you're bullish on that or not, and kind of also thinking about robotics as part of that shift from perhaps built on site to built in a factory. What do you think about the innovation happening over there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally bullish on what's going on. I mean, it feels inevitable. Obviously, it's hard to look at, and it's a bit of a graveyard of startups.
Yeah.
But the newest generation, what Icon is doing, QB, Alex Gamble who runs QB, very smart dude. What American Housing Corporation is doing now, building kind of townhomes in a panelized way. I think it's smart. I think it's smart. I'm not a construction expert. Um, so I have some degree of just like caution around it, given the history of the space. But it makes sense, and I think it should happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I agree. I agree. I mean, I think um one of the trends that I think kind of popped up almost in that last newsletter you had about Driggs, Idaho, some of these secondary leisure towns is the idea of like democratizing luxury or democratizing this lifestyle that typically was reserved for people with millions of dollars that could afford to buy a vacation home there, but then modular and some of these structures becoming more affordable. I think that there's generally like a new level of um, standard of living that's becoming possible. That's also becoming possible to so many more people than it was originally reserved for.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a generally good investment strategy to not bet against mass affluence. Um, you know, things that were reserved for the wealthy tend to percolate down to the rest of us,
Yeah,
and that is one of those universal rules of capitalism, I believe.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Sweet man, I agree. I think it's going to be super exciting to see what happens here in the coming, I don't know, quarter, year plus. Any other major shifts or projects you want to touch on?
Look, I mean, I'm really excited about what's happening with autonomous vehicles right now. I mean, I know we've
Yeah,
been talking about autonomous vehicles for a very long time. I think a lot of people got burned by the hype cycle in 2016 to 2018 or so and kind of wrote them off entirely. But they're very real in a number of markets in Bay Area, Los Angeles, Austin, Atlanta, Las Vegas, and those certainly Waymo is the leader in that space right now, but I think Tesla's, given their data, is going to be a fast mover. And I'm very interested to see what impact that's going to have on real estate.
yeah, that's what I was just going to ask. I mean, um, I was just talking with a guy about robotics storage. Like, could you use modular for robotic storage units and things like that? Self driving also, parking lots free of cars, things like this. Do you have a very strong thesis on some macro shifts that we'll see because of these changes?
Well, I think it's going to supercharge this trend toward exurbanization that we've seen over the past, you know, 10 years, really since the pandemic. It's accelerated. I think it's, living an hour and a half away from CBD, when you're coming in 3 days a week and you can read a book in the car, feels a lot better than living an hour and a half away when you're coming in 5 days a week and you need your eyes glued on the road. I don't think that's the case for everyone, but it doesn't have to be the case for everyone. If that changes the view of 10% of the population, that's a massive, massive shift from a real estate standpoint. And I think we're only at the beginning of that. And that's before you think about things like eVTOLs and, other, I would say, fringier transportation technologies. But you just restrict it to autonomous vehicles, I think you're going to see, not necessarily a hit to cities per se, but certainly inner ring suburbs, I think, lose some of their luster. Anything transit oriented loses a little bit of its luster. I mean, if autonomous vehicles are ubiquitous, like, look, and I love public transit. I take public transit all the time here in New York City. But like, outside of New York, public transit systems are pretty marginal. And are you really gonna like want to sit on a train in Chicago for 45 minutes if an autonomous vehicle can take you door to door for, maybe a slight premium? So I think it's going to be devastating for public transit systems in any city outside of New York.
Super interesting. And yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. Is there a way you think investors can get involved in opportunities because, that are made possible because of this trend beyond investing in, let's say, the autonomous vehicles, but on the real estate side?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing to figure out how to track from a real estate investment thesis. I mean, powered land is probably the best play. Um, Rural powered land has obviously become really hot from a data center standpoint, but near urban powered land, so small industrial sites that come with utility contracts will be needed for fleet storage because if these cars are, taking people between the suburbs and the center city, like they need to charge and they don't want to drive 60 miles to charge. They'll need to charge somewhere near the central business district or suburban clusters. And so, think, powered land, but different types of powered land than we're seeing for data centers is going to continue to be a strong thesis.
Interesting. Is there is there some sort of trend you're seeing? Like, do you guys ever talk to renters or people that are buying homes, and ask them, like, what are they looking for in this next generation of housing? I know that we kind of speculate, but like, who's actually talking to the tenants and building for them? Like, do you guys
Yeah,
do that?
totally. So we don't do that kind of primary research ourselves. We pay attention and read research reports from a lot of firms that do. Obviously, when you're reading those, you always have to like cast somewhat of an eye of skepticism of like in many cases they have an agenda that comes with come with those studies. Um, One just like macro trend we're going to see that is worth touching on, and it's you know people in real estate vary wildly based on in their opinion of how big of a deal this is. But we're quickly going to hit peak uh 22-year-olds. We hit last year peak 18-year-olds, and in about 3 years we'll hit peak 22-year-olds, which is each successive generation, each successive cohort of people graduating from school is smaller than the prior one. So we have a dwindling pool of people looking for this pool of houses and apartments, which is a demographic problem they faced in Asia for a while, in Europe for a while. We've never faced it in the United States. We had pretty close to replacement birth rates until 2009 when rates dropped quite a bit. And then obviously over the past year, immigration has dropped substantially. And so we're really staring down potential population declines for the first time in our country's history. And that's never been something the real estate industry has had to face.
Yeah. Wow. That will be really wild to see what happens. I mean, do you know the percentage change? Like the decline percentage from one
It's
generation?
small. I mean, it's very small from a percentage
Yeah,
basis, and even when it will start, I think now at this point everyone kind of agrees that we are heading into a future population decline. But I think when it happens is still a matter of a lot of debate. I mean, there's some who believe that it's not going to start until 2040, and others believe it actually started last year. So
interesting.
there's still a lot of debate and discussion about like
Right.
how many people really are there around here.
So interesting. Yeah, I wonder, and in general, I mean, it sounds like it has massive implications for real estate in general, but what could you do to hedge against that, I guess, as an investor?
Invest in memory care facilities
Yeah.
because that is the portion of the population that is unambiguously growing for decades to come. Is baby boomers getting older and older and older, and you know things like cardiovascular disease and cancer killing fewer of them. It's increasingly Alzheimer's and dementia. And so there's going to be a dramatic increase in need for memory care facilities in the next 10 to 20 years.
That's a good tidbit for anybody listening. Super wild. Yeah. But I mean, these are the trends that you guys cover. That's why I love coming back to your resources. Brad, this has been awesome. I'd love to touch base with you again at some point and have another episode. This has been enlightening and super cool. So
Well,
thanks again for jumping
yeah,
on.
thanks so much for having me on, Matt. This is great.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. We'll talk soon. And for anybody listening, maybe shout out the best ways to follow you guys to check out what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Brad Hargreaves on LinkedIn. You can follow me there. I'm posting just about every day. Or thesisdriven.com. You can see all of our workshops, educational offerings, and data products.
Fantastic. Thank you everybody for tuning in to Future Built. Thank you, Brad, for jumping on, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds great, Matt.